So there's a very interesting report that kind of started trending over the past couple of days. Apparently, the Las Vegas Raiders had a team meeting in which there were a lot of things that ultimately were said. If you guys remember last year, we had this meeting where players took multiple shots at Josh McDaniels, which ultimately led to Antonio Pierce speaking up, kind of bringing the team together, which led to Josh McDaniels being fired a day later. But what's interesting is we had a very similar meeting like the one we had last year, and this time things weren't a whole lot different, at least according to what I've heard, and we'll talk about that later on. But first, check out the actual report that came out by CBS Sports. To me, it's a very, very interesting report. Check this out.
The Raiders made some changes this past week, firing offensive coordinator Luke Getsy and two other offensive staff members after their loss to the Bengals on Sunday. In the coming days, head coach Antonio Pierce would elevate Scott Turner to interim OC, make senior advisor Joe Philbin the offensive line coach, and bring longtime NFL coach Norv Turner in as an offensive advisor. Norv, of course, the father of Scott. But that is not all. On Monday afternoon, there was a players and staff meeting, and in it, Kyle, in it, players spoke up. They talked about needing a more efficient schedule, that there was too much time being wasted, that there needed to be more structure, more discipline, more accountability within the entire program. Now, the Raiders are on a bye this week, but the hope is these changes from that vent session will help the two-win Raiders have a strong back half of the season, just like last year, Amy.
So one of the interesting things I take right away with this report is the fact that players spoke up, including Maxx Crosby. Right, multiple players spoke up, and they basically said that this team's not being run properly. Right, there's issues. There's a scheduling issue. Right, essentially we're not running things efficiently right now. We're wasting too much time on things that we don't need to spend time on, right? Multiple players apparently said that. There needs to be more structure. Players need to be held accountable. Guys got to be more disciplined, right? And it's not just guys, but the coaching staff has to be more disciplined. There needs to be more accountability. To me, it's interesting that this report's coming out that in this players' meeting that happened, where the Raiders ultimately went back and forth with the coaching staff, it's interesting to me that we're hearing that there needs to be more accountability, because one of the things that we know with the Raiders is we went to so many different directions over the past couple of years, right? Years back, we had Jack Del Rio as our coach, and Jack Del Rio was on the stricter side with how he kind of ran things. Then we got John Gruden, who came in, loved to have fun, right? Although John Gruden, he wasn't super open and super relaxed. He was a lot more of, we're gonna have fun, we're gonna do things differently, right? We'll change things up. Players like John Gruden's general approach. And then after John Gruden ultimately resigned, fired, whatever you want to say, after the John Gruden era, we got Josh McDaniels, who went absolutely max with how strict you can be. There's not a coach stricter than Josh McDaniels. And players hated it, right? We had heard that players did not like the whole approach with Josh McDaniels. So we went to all these different coaching staffs, all these different mindsets, and players hated Josh McDaniels. And then when Josh McDaniels got fired, AP came in, and everybody's having fun all of a sudden. They're smoking cigars. They're out there playing basketball in the locker room, right? Guys are just more free. They're more relaxed. They're having more fun. And apparently now is too much. Apparently the Raiders don't have that accountability anymore. And what's crazy with me is Antonio Pierce is a first-year coach, right? So I'm not surprised that he's not 100% figured it out at this point. And I don't blame him at all, right? He's inexperienced. He was a college coach just a couple years back, became an NFL linebackers coach, and became a head coach. You don't generally become a head coach that quickly, right? AP was, it just doesn't happen that way, right? So with AP, you expect there to be small issues, small things that he'll have to adjust and just kind of grow and kind of get better. But what's bothering me specifically is the fact that how many head coaches do we have on this roster? How many guys do we have on this roster? Why could none of those guys figure these things out? That's a concern to me, right? If players aren't being held accountable, if we're wasting too much time, what the hell is Marvin Lewis and Rob Ryan and Joe Philbin? What the hell are these guys here for if we're wasting too much time and we're not, apparently according to the schedule, is not efficient? What are those guys doing, right? And that's a real concern to me. What's the point of these guys if they're not ultimately able to help AP run a smooth team? Antonio Pierce has a guy that helps with game management, right? The Raiders have this guy hired. His only role is to help with game management. That guy has a legit role. We know what it is. He's going to help AP with specific scenarios, specific situations. We know what Rob Leonard brings, right? He's going to essentially try to develop the defensive linemen. He's going to coach these guys up. He's going to fire these guys up. But what does Marvin Lewis and Rob Ryan really do? right? Because to me, the fact that, these guys are assistant coaches to Antonio Pierce, right? Marvin Lewis, Rob Ryan, their assistants. I would think that Rob Ryan's going to be there and he's going to say, hey, well, this is what we're going to do from a scheduling perspective. Rob Leonard, you have, 12 minutes to do X, Y, and Z, another 12 to do X, Y, and Z. And then after you spend 30 minutes doing, whatever it is, for the next hour, we're going to go do this, right? And this is kind of your general schedule. You'd expect these veteran coaches to be able to help out. And again, I'm not blaming these guys, but the fact that the Raiders are having to have this meeting where players are kind of talking with one another, they're looking at these coaches and they're kind of putting the blame where the blame should go or maybe not go. To me, it's unacceptable. Now, obviously, the Raiders did make some coaching changes, and I had heard for weeks that there were a lot of issues with the offensive coaching staff. I had heard for weeks that James Craig wasn't that good of an offensive line coach, and you can kind of see that with some of the players. I'm not saying that DJ Glaze is a terrible player or even Jackson Powers Johnson, but the decision to say like, hey, we're going to put Jackson Powers Johnson at left guard, or we're going to put Cody Whitehair in there when there's guys that are better. Like Jordan Meredith's always been better than Cody Whitehair. It's not been close. And I had talked about this in the preseason. As an offensive line coach, you got to recognize the little things. And you got to go with the guys that make sense. Jackson Powers Johnson made sense to always play center. And I know the Raiders announced him as technically a guard, even when he was ultimately drafted. But at some point, you got to recognize this guy's a phenomenal center, and he's been elite, right? We saw him play this entire game just this past week. He's an elite center, right? It's decisions like that. And James Craig was one inexperienced. He was never an actual offensive line coach, right? He was always an assistant, up at least in the NFL. So it's just little things that I had known that things just did not run that smoothly. Rob Leonard's a great example of a coach that does a really, really, really good job, right? He's a really good defensive line coach. We know what he brings. But then we hired guys like James Craig and even Luke Getsy to a point, right? Luke Getsy's a bad offense coordinator. Most players can tell you that, right? After spending 2 weeks with this guy's not a good coach. And I almost feel like, although Devontae Adams backed up Luke Getsy, I almost think Devontae Adams did that just because he had to do that. I don't think Devontae Adams really liked Luke Getsy as an actual coach. I'm pretty sure Devontae Adams spent 2 weeks with that guy and realized this guy's not a good coach. He can't install an offense, can't design spacing-wise, all off. To me, there have always been issues with the Raiders. And coming out of this meeting, hopefully it does benefit the Raiders. But at this point, I'm really not sure what it's going to bring to the Las Vegas Raiders because the season's basically over. You can go on a run. You can win every single game here forward. Maybe make the playoffs, maybe not. But you're not going to win every game. That's just kind of unrealistic. Even if you win 85% of games, what does that really do for the Raiders? Right? I think the one thing the Raiders can do for the rest of the season is hopefully figure out if Antonio Pierce is the coach of the future. We shouldn't have to have players and staff meetings. That's not normal, right? That is not a normal thing. You should not be having your players and your staff meet to essentially, blame each other or talk about it. What's the issues and what's going on? Like no player should ever say, hey, my coach is not running things efficiently. That's like basic stuff. Very, very basic stuff. We're wasting time on things that we should not be wasting time on. That's very, very, very basic stuff, right? We should not be having to go through that. And I do hope that if Antonio Pierce cannot prove himself for the rest of the season, I hope the Raiders move on. And I do hope that Mark Davis really considers the differences between the great teams that have success year in, year out, and the teams that suck. And it's not keeping the same coach for 10 years. That's not what allows teams to be great. It's not. It's hiring a great head coach. That's what allows teams to be great. Right? If John Gruden can have success or not, right? If you keep him for 7 years, he'll have success. John Gruden's proven that to us. Josh McDaniels, just not a good coach. Luke Getsy is just not a good coach. Now, I'm not saying AP can't be that if you kept him for 7 years, but I can guarantee you guys, Ben Johnson's going to be a great coach in the NFL. I can guarantee you guys, Jim Harbaugh is going to be a great coach no matter where he ends up going. In fact, he goes to the Los Angeles Chargers, a Chargers team that cut multiple players from last year to this year. Like, they literally got quote-unquote weaker, right? They got rid of Mike Williams. They got rid of Keenan Allen. And they're still better. They're a playoff team. I think they're like 6-3 or whatever they are. To me, your coach makes a big difference. And for the Raiders to be good, you got to get that coach. I think it's more important than having a good quarterback, because you can always find a quarterback. Baker Mayfield will be out there. Sam Darnold will be out there. There's always quarterbacks like that are out there, but you got to get that coach to put it together. So if the Raiders want to have long-term success, it's going to start with that coach. It's going to start with hiring the right guy. The 49ers, had the Harbaugh years, right, the first time he was a coach. After Harbaugh in his final year, right, he struggled, and everybody kind of started talking about how there's ownership issues with Harbaugh. They fired Harbaugh. I think they won like 6-7 games or whatever it was. They hired Chip Kelly for 1 year. And although Chip Kelly was in his first year and, it was kind of a rebuild, they realized real quick that Kyle Shanahan's a great coach. So they got rid of Chip Kelly because they knew Kyle Shanahan was going to be a great coach. That's what great organizations do. They find great coaches. The Rams, if you guys remember years back, were the laughing stock the way the Raiders are right now. The Dolphins were a laughing stock the way the Raiders are right now. And those teams flipped it as soon as they got that coach. To me, if the Raiders want to be good, they got to hire a good coach. And I think there's some coaching candidates out there. Ben Johnson, Bobby Slowick is another guy that I like. The Raiders got to just hire the right coach. And remember, a great coach doesn't come around every year. Right? Ben Johnson's not going to be available every single year. Right? So hopefully the Raiders can figure it out. Either AP's the guy. If he's not, got to make that decision. Got to move forward. Best thing about this week, man, is the Raiders actually have a game coming up on Sunday. That bye week is very, very, very difficult. In fact, I ended up not doing any picks for underdog, and I kind of want to just end this video showing you guys some of my picks for Monday night because we did not do picks for the actual week here. We're going to do a $10 entry for $210. Super straightforward. Puka Nacua just has to rush for 1.4 yards. If you guys don't know this, Puka Nacua goes in motion. He's the receiver that's oftentimes being motioned, and he gets like 2 or 3 carries every game, at least when he's healthy. So 1.5 rushing yards, I can almost guarantee if this guy gets at least 1 rushing touch, and again, he goes into motion a lot, if they just hand it to him, he's going to get that. Devon Achane, 16.85 fantasy points. I think that's pretty doable for a guy like Achane. Tyreek Hill, 5.5 receptions. That's the one that's kind of, I'm kind of hesitant with, right? He has to get more, he has to get at least 6 catches. I'm not 100% sure if he'll get that, but it is Monday Night Football, and I do think that the Dolphins got to, they're in a must-win kind of situation. Matthew Stafford has thrown an interception in each of the last 3 games, so I do think there's a chance he's going to throw another one this week. The Dolphins are also a very opportunistic defense, so maybe they'll force Matthew Stafford into an interception. And then Raheem Mostert needs at least 29 yards. I think he can get that rushing. He's getting healthy. He's getting right. Although Achane's the future for the Dolphins, there's a chance Mostert, 2 or 3 carries, he picks that up real quick. So we'll see what ends up happening. There's my picks. If you guys are interested in making your own picks, make your picks using the code in the comments down below. And make sure you tag me on Twitter, man. I'd love to interact with you guys and love to get your guys' mindset on some of these picks. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, man. The Raiders got to figure it out. I think they will. They'll get a quarterback this upcoming class. Hopefully they do right on the head coaching decision. If you can land Ben Johnson, if you can land Bobby Slowick, you make it happen. If you can't, on the other hand, then maybe you stick with AP. We'll see what ends up happening. Thumbs up, subscribe, and I will see you guys next time with another video.